We hand out awards to the Ravens for their 2021 season next here on Locked On Ravens with a very special guest.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
As we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, I am your host, Kevin Ostrecker of Ravens Wire. We are here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And we're back here today on a Purple Friday. And here with us as our Purple Friday guest is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver, Super Bowl champion, Qadry Ismail. And Q, speaking of Super Bowl champions, that is the Rams this year for the 2021-2022 season. How you doing after that pretty crazy game?
I tell you what, Kevin, the Super Bowl every year, once you win it, you have such a greater appreciation for it. You have a great appreciation for the game, the lead up to the game, the way in which you get all the pomp and circumstance, the pregame, the way in which everybody kind of gets all hyped up for it. The Rock. I don't know why in the world they would put 40 minutes of guys standing around and you think, oh, the coin toss, we're about to have a great game. And then all of a sudden, here comes The Rock and he has another monologue that was forever. I guess somehow, some way, they thought it was going to be cool, but not so much. That being said, the game itself, it was a fantastic game, lots of ebbs and flows. And the guys that needed to step up and make plays, in fact, made plays. I mean, the stars for both teams needed to represent. And the guys that I would say this, that blinked first, that was the team that was going to lose. And sure enough, here's the Rams with their composure in the final minutes of the game. They didn't blink. And I think they are deserving of being Super Bowl champions.
Right. You could kind of sense that energy shift is, in the first half, the Rams weren't really blitzing. They were kind of rushing for, and that let the Bengals double team Aaron Donald. They couldn't really get one-on-one matchups for him. Then the Rams started bringing that fifth guy a little bit, and Aaron Donald started to dominate. The Bengals offensive line started to falter, and that's really where the momentum shifted in there. But Q, with the takeaways from this game, there are plenty of them, but I wanted to get them, at least your opinions on it from a Ravens perspective, because there are a ton of things you could look at and say, well, if the Ravens could do this or the Ravens could do that, they could get back to this big game.
Yeah, so impact player, like you were saying with Aaron Donald, is of the utmost. I think the Super Bowl year in 2000 that I was a part of, you had a historic defense, and your defense was littered with impact players, plural. Obviously, Rod Woodson in the back end, Ray Lewis on that linebacker core that was just dynamic, and then, of course, that defensive front, whether it been Michael McCrary or Rob Burnett or Peter Boulware, it didn't matter. You were going to Tony Siragusa, Sam Adams. When you look at the 2012 team, I think that team was, again, littered with, stars all over the place. You had an Ed Reed. You had, at that time, a guy who, I thought, all right, how's he going to be? But I think for the way in which they played, he played phenomenal. Why is he slipping my mind? The corner, still on the team.
Jalen Ramsey?
Oh, God, no. I'm talking about for the Ravens of 2000. But again, I'm like sitting there. He made the great play on Jimmy Smith. Thank you. I'm sitting there like, how did I draw a blank? But Jimmy Smith on the back end of things. You obviously had a Ray Lewis, a little bit past his prime, but still effective as a field general. And then, of course, Terrell Suggs and Haloti Ngata, guys along those lines, just played phenomenal. When you look at this year's Super Bowl champion in the Rams, they had their studs. Comparing this Ravens ball club to this year's team, and how do you project going forward? Right off the bat, you would just say that from a poise standpoint, the way in which both teams had, their A game at quarterback, Matthew Stafford making plays. I thought, for the most part, it it wasn't that Burrow was bad. It was more along the lines of, he was trying to overcome so much. And I think the mindset of trying to get Mixon involved, he was just okay. He wasn't, stellar. Had, a few runs that were 20-something, but that was about it. But Jamar Chase definitely stood up and really made some tremendous plays. Obviously, T. Higgins with his, touchdown catches as well. My point is that I think the Ravens have the pieces to say, we have a stud at quarterback that can be really poised. Obviously, in Lamar Jackson, they have, the pieces in place when healthy, guys who can run the ball effectively. And now it's going to remains to be seen how they're going to come back from the ACL injuries. But both Gus as well as JK have that dynamic capability. Receiver wise, okay, I would say more along the lines of Andrews is that go-to guy because he's proven it clearly, all pro and the whole nine. Whereas, Bateman, we got to see 16 games out of him. But I think just looking at it, like, wow, where are the Ravens? How do they fit? They're not that far off. There are some things that need to be cleaned up along the offensive line, whether or not they sign Bozeman or not, or clearly they need to draft some guys on the offensive line. But I think just as a whole, this ball club, in my mind, Kevin, is not that far off when you look at the grand scheme of things, talent to talent.
Right. And I think also you mentioned the guys they're going to get back, and the talent that is just by itself is a huge boost. It's like signing like 4 or 5 top quality free agents, even though they're not actually signing with their team. They're coming back and they're adding to this team. And then also, I don't think any roster is going to be perfect, right? No NFL roster is perfect. And you can say, all right, well, every single position has like 10 studs at it and we're good. But it's a matter of how teams can kind of compensate for those weaknesses and mask those weaknesses while also building the best roster they can. And I think having a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, he can mask some of those weaknesses, but at the same time, I think this team does understand, the trenches are a huge part of where this team needs to improve, both on offense and on defense. Protect your quarterback, get pressure from the interior, and stop the run. Those are all things that are really, really important. But there's been a bit of a conversation over the past couple of weeks here, especially as the Super Bowl has concluded, about the way that the Bengals and the Rams kind of approached things. You have the Rams, who were the champions, who really just went all in. They traded a ton of their picks away for stars, and it was really this year or bust for them, because then you're wondering about who's coming back, what's the talent drop-off, who's retiring, who's not. The Bengals, on the other hand, they kind of built this team through their draft picks, top draft picks such as Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and a couple others as well, where they didn't really go out there and like trade all their picks away. They drafted players and developed their players into what they are today. Jesse Bates, another example of that. So Q, if you're the Ravens in that situation and you're looking at these two examples where the Ravens have definitely been more on the Bengals side of things, would you kind of take a different approach and say, hey, let's trade our picks for quality talent and go all in? Or would you rather take that Bengals approach in the way they've been doing it and saying, let's just develop our guys and trust them?
Well, I think it's the Ravens' way is kind of a little bit of both, to be perfectly honest with you. You look at, the draft and you set your board. What is the board looking like? Who are, the positions that you would say are going to be impact positions? Then you look at your salary cap. Who do you feel you can realistically get, if free agency comes about in the first wave? Then you got the second wave of free agency when guys, a little bit more realistic about the number that they were going to get when it came to getting paid. And so I think the way in which the Ravens would do it would be a little bit of a combination of both. Obviously, the Bengals have not been a very good team for a long time. So you're going to get a number 1 pick. You're going to get a top, guy in Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. I mean, that's just how it is. And I think, sure, I've heard Eric say this before. I've heard even Ozzy say this before. No question about it. You would love to have a top stud guy, but you got to suck from the year prior to get up to that level. So it makes evaluation, of a premium, and it's a crapshoot as far as, hitting on different picks. Can it be done? Absolutely, it can be done. I think that's something that, yeah, the bigger picture is, whether or not you want to, go out there and just say, we're going to do the safe thing in a draft, but be very aggressive in free agency. I just don't see it happening. I see a combination of what they would see and look at what the Rams have done, and a combination from the draft and be some homegrown, more towards a homegrown that the Bengals have done.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's part of like, people are saying that the Ravens haven't had that aggressive mindset. They haven't gone out there and acquired players. They haven't necessarily traded first round picks for guys, but they went out and got Marcus Peters. They went out and got Calais Campbell. They're looking at other teams and saying, how can guys help the Ravens? And they also, with the rumors that the Ravens were in on DeAndre Hopkins, they were in on Xavier Howard. Eric DeCosta is looking, and I know it's kind of a gut punch for a lot of people to hear the DeAndre Hopkins things and kind of thinking, oh, what if the Ravens had gotten DeAndre Hopkins? But it's those types of moves where the Ravens are looking to improve their team, not just through the draft, but figuring out how they can leverage those draft picks with other teams and saying, hey, if you're not high on this guy and you're looking to move off of him, we can offer you this, that, and the other. And the Ravens with 10 draft picks this year can do that, whether that's moving up in the draft and getting a top 8, top 7 pick, moving up from 14, or doing whatever they want to do there. The Ravens have had success doing the half Bengals, half Rams, but as you say, Q, kind of more towards the Bengals because they've had success drafting and developing that talent. And now what we're starting to see is the talent they're developing. They can't retain all of it because they're just so good where, Zadarius Smith leaves and Matthew Judon leaves. And we'll see with this free agent class, Bradley Bozeman, Anthony Averett, etc. That's just what it is. So also, I think they understand with the Lamar Jackson extension likely coming down the pipeline at some point here, they understand that they can't afford to give out these long-term 5-year, $100 million deals because in 3 years, they're not going to have that money because it's going to go to Jackson. So it's those types of things that I think are really put things in perspective, and it makes me appreciate a bit more about how good the Ravens have been about developing their talent. We'll head into our first break here now, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into the Ravens 2021 award show where we'll be handing out our awards first for the offensive side of the ball. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full swing for both pro and college hoops. For all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. So head to the website or use your mobile to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back with our second segment here at Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. Let's hand out some awards, shall we? On the offensive side of the ball here, this Ravens team, very, very, it was difficult, I'll say, in some situations. I mean, especially in the second half of that season. You have a team that lost Lamar Jackson. You have a team that lost their running back room before the preseason started. So, Q, with this offensive side of the ball, let's start off with MVP because the Ravens, I mean, for what they have gone through on that side of the ball in 2021, guys had to step up. And for me, I'll give my picks after you give yours, but who was for you the Ravens team MVP on offense in 2021?
That's probably the easiest one. It's Mark Andrews. I mean, the guy's an all-pro. He set a Ravens record as far as the most receiving yards. He darn near led the league as far as everyone, including tight ends, but he finished in that upper echelon as far as statistical category across the board. And the Ravens, when they went through, the Lamar Jackson bone bruise on his heel injury, and it didn't matter if it was Tyler Huntley, it didn't matter if it was Johnson. It didn't matter who it was that was a quarterback. He was going to show up and make plays and deliver. And I thought he did. And I thought that, his play was the reason why the Ravens really were in all the games offensively this year.
Yeah, to have a guy like that who can work with so many different quarterbacks and not miss a beat. I mean, Lamar Jackson is obviously their star. Tyler Huntley is a good backup, and Josh Johnson is someone who actually I thought he showed a lot in that Cincinnati game. But regardless, the talent drop off from Jackson to Huntley and from Huntley to Johnson, you can argue that however you want, but the fact that he didn't miss a beat while working with those guys, he broke countless records, and it seemed like he caught that head of steam and just continued with it for the rest of the season. He started off a bit slow, and then that Colts game was the coming out party for him, where he had 149 and 2 scores or something, and then from there on, it was like, all right, Mark Andrews, he was the best tight end in football in 2021. I know a lot of people look at Travis Kelce and say, what about Travis Kelce? But in 2021, Mark Andrews takes that award home for me, and that's why he takes the Ravens team MVP. But Q, with the people who had to step up, there were a bunch of surprises for the Ravens. And I want to get your opinion on who was the most surprising player for you to kind of step up in a role and either do well or the opposite of that, not do well.
I would say Josh Bynes, as far as the guy that was most surprising and stepping up. And here's why. Because you needed to kind of solidify that linebacker position at the middle linebacker spot. A lot was made of Patrick Queen and his athletic ability and being the middle linebacker. But what wound up happening was he wasn't good enough to hold down a position. And we go back even to when the Washington Commanders were the Washington football team, and he getting benched because he just didn't, know the defense well enough. But Josh Bynes, literally, was on the street, comes back, understands the defense extremely well, and kind of settled everybody down over there. And so I think it'll be, for me, Josh Bynes.
Right. For me, there are a bunch of different people who could be most surprising. I'm gonna take a different approach and say Justin Madubuike was surprising that he didn't make as much of an impact as I expected him to. I picked Madubuike to be this guy who was going to be the Ravens' breakout player in 2021 and have this monster season, especially with Derek Wolfe going down and kind of Calais Campbell being out and Brandon Williams being out. You're kind of thinking, all right, well, Justin Madubuike is going to be this star for what he showed, and he didn't really wow in a ton of different ways. So that's me for most surprising. But Q, the Ravens, speaking of just a bunch of different things, Baltimore had a lot of disappointments on offense in 2021, whether it be the run game or be the offensive line. There were a lot of players who you kind of thought, they could have been so much more, but they just didn't. They disappointed. So on offense for you, Q, who was the most disappointing player in 2021 for Baltimore?
So offensively, I would say the most disappointing position was running back. I think the most disappointing player, though, I'm pivoting somewhat from the running back to say Alejandro Villanueva. And whether Ben Hendrickson with the Bengals, who was getting after Lamar, or Watt, who was getting after Lamar, I guess I just expected more. That's all I'm going to say. I expected more. I was hoping for more, and I didn't get it. And then I think a close second, he didn't have – he was too up and down. Let's just be real about it. He was too up and down. Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown, I thought, you handle your business versus Detroit. You handle your business at the end of the year and make a touchdown catch versus the Pittsburgh Steelers that goes right through your hands. I think, we're looking at a different team, if he can get going. So those two guys and that group of running backs, that was the most disappointing for me.
Yeah, I want to elaborate a bit on the running backs because my most disappointing guy, not Devonta Freeman, by the way, it is Tyson Williams. I think that, so many people expected so much out of Tyson Williams. I mean, once Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins went down and Justice Hill, obviously, too, it was really like Tyson Williams was the only guy who was with the team throughout the preseason. And he showed a lot of flashes in that preseason. And then all of a sudden, he kind of gets in the John Harbaugh doghouse. He's not blocking super effectively. He's giving up on plays, as we saw on one game on a 4th down. So it was disappointing for that because I think with him, he added an extra dynamic to what the Ravens were trying to do in the run game, but he just didn't perform on the field. And once you get in that John Harbaugh doghouse, it is very, very hard to get out of it. So I think for me, my most disappointing is Tyson Williams. But Q, with the disappointments, there are players who did improve a ton over the course of this season. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one for the offense because, again, people had to step up. There were guys who improved throughout the year. So who was that guy for you on offense?
Well, crazy as it seems, I mean, he just went out there and did his job and did a really, really strong job of it. Was Bradley Bozeman. Because if you recall, last year, you were looking at a snap going over the head of Lamar Jackson in New England, cost them the game. Snap going over the head in the playoffs, and it cost them the game, and it cost Lamar a concussion. So I think Bozeman. That's an easy one right there. I'm like, wow. Now a close second for a rookie to have surgery at the receiver position and come back the way he did. All he does is just make first downs. And he just showed up and just I honestly think, what Bateman did was very underrated. I know everybody's like, yeah, he's first round pick. Yeah, but you try going out there, as a wide receiver on an island, trying to figure out your game. You figured out your game, but at the same time, you were productive from missing because of injury, and that says an awful lot.
It does, and it's difficult. And Bateman even said himself that him going through it was a little difficult because he hadn't really dealt with that type of injury before, the serious type injury, and so to have that in training camp of your first NFL season, you're kind of trying to establish yourself. That can be very hard. So yeah, my pick was Bozeman, but I want to differentiate a little bit. So I'm going to go with Tyler Huntley. I know a lot of people were disappointed with his end of season performance.
Sure.
The last two games he played were probably his two worst, but we did see improvement over the course of his snaps or starts or whatever you want to say. And I mean, for me, I think Huntley is somebody who, with those snaps, those are going to be so valuable for him moving forward, because even though everybody wanted to see Lamar Jackson out there, Jackson gives them the best chance to win. If Jackson goes down again or has to miss time for some reason, which hopefully is not the case, Huntley can step in and I think be a lot better with those snaps under his belt than he would have been if Jackson had played the whole year and all of a sudden you're going through what you went through last year, just a couple of years or a year later. I think that's super, super important for me. But Q, with these injuries, I feel like I have to throw in comeback player of the year, but let's look ahead to 2022 for that. So who do you think on offense will be the Ravens comeback player of the year in 2022?
The prognostication. I'm going to say Marcus Peters. Defense, close will be I'm gonna say Tyus Bowser, because the injury is easy to come back from. His injury is easier to come back from. But I'm gonna say Marcus Peters second. I'm gonna say offense. That's easy. Lamar Jackson. You bruised yourself. Come on, you're hurting, but we're seeing on social media him slinging it back. So I think he has a lot to prove. He didn't sign the deal that was offered to him. So I think he's, playing the leverage game, which I think is phenomenal for him to do. We know what happened last time a Ravens quarterback bet on himself. So, I'm gonna throw some love over to Lamar.
Oh yeah, and sticking with offense, Jackson is my pick as well. But I mean, I have to give love to the running backs too. I mean, I think J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, man. I mean, those are those guys. And I think, look, as much as
you are a running back, like I can say, a lover.
I am. I think it's huge and so important, and for how obviously amazing Devonta Freeman was in 2021, to have a guy like J.K. Dobbins, to have a guy like Gus Edwards out there. I mean, it's such a difference to have. And you and I've said this before, for people who watch this team, although the Ravens were in the top 5 in a bunch of rushing categories, they were not a top 5 rushing offense. It was not a good team in terms of running the football. So to have guys like that back, and also quickly throwing in Ronnie Stanley, who, we have to hope his injury is, he can recover from it and everything's good. It was obviously a very gruesome, very tough injury. in the first place. But if he can come back at full strength, what he means to this offensive line, I mean, it is so important to have a guy like that. So I'll give love to the running backs. I'll give love to Stanley, but I think obviously on offense, Jackson is my pick for comeback player of the year because of just what he brings. I mean, he's what makes the gears turn. We'll head into our final break here, though. When we get back, we'll flip over to defense and get into those awards. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. This is the time of year that people give up on those New Year's resolutions, but don't do that this year. And do it thanks to Built Bar. If you haven't tried the Built Bar Puffs, you're missing out on Built Bar's best tasting bars. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy and marshmallowy, and they're not just a protein bar. They're a treat. They're low-calorie, high-protein, and they have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. There are so many flavors to choose from. So go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. You get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. Let's flip over to defense, hand out some awards, and let's just do some of the same here with the defensive MVP to start. Now, this one's a bit difficult because there are so many guys who were just injured for the majority of the year or part of the year, guys who went out with injuries, who came back and then went out again. So if you had to pick a defensive MVP in 2021, Q, who would it be?
I would have said Tyus Bowser, but he got hurt. I got to say Josh Bynes. I mean, those are the two guys that, when it came down to it, Tyus just was ascending. Unfortunately, he got hurt. But I would say those two guys neck and neck. I think, again, this defense was, your coordinator got fired because you was missing some tackles, you was missing some plays. That dude came in and he did not look back. He was locked in. And the way in which he was showing off his leadership to helping out, young guys like Patrick Queen, to settle things down or wear that green dot on your helmet, call plays. I don't know what else to say. I really do like and respect his game an awful lot.
Yeah, and I'll continue to say it. Josh Bynes was the savior of this Ravens defense in 2021. Now, the results in some areas were not amazing, but I can't even imagine what it would be like if Josh Bynes didn't come in. What would Patrick Queen have done? How would this defense have responded without having that? How would they have improved? So, yeah, I mean, those are my two guys, Q. We're on the same wavelength here today, but I'm going to say another guy who I was very impressed with was Tavon Young. Young was somebody.
I can see that.
Yeah, he was somebody who I go out on a limb. I say a hot take for me is Tavon Young was the team's best tackler in 2021, and obviously there was a low bar, right? So
yep.
There's a bunch where you can look at with Tavon Young, and obviously I'm going to give him part of the award because he stayed healthy. I mean, for Young, he's somebody who we know has dealt with injuries over the course of his NFL career. He stayed healthy for the most part. Got dinged up a couple times in game, was on the injury report a lot, but was in there when his team needed him. Provided great coverage out of the slot. And I think for those three guys that we mentioned there, Q, that's a pretty good roster of guys, plus the guys they're going to get back. It just makes a lot of sense that the defense will take a step forward, especially with what they can do this offseason. But let's get to most improved here on defense. There were guys across the board who had to step up on defense this year because of Marcus Peters going down, Derek Wolfe not being available, and all the other guys who went out with injuries. So, Q, who was the most improved to you on defense in 2021 for Baltimore?
I gotta say Tyus Bowser. The dude was making impact plays. I mean, I look back at the Chicago game. They don't win the Chicago game if he doesn't make the impact plays that he made. I don't know. Who was it? Malik Harrison? Anthony Averett for a hot second. Like, yeah, kind of did a little drive-by. Calais was an MIA. Matabike. Yeah. Who had the pick six? Was that Chuck Clark?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say he would be in the conversation because their defensive backfield was god-awful. But he would be in the conversation, but Tyus Bowser.
Yeah, it's obvious for Tyus Bowser. I'm gonna give love to two guys who I say kind of struggled a bit early, but really got it together late. Obviously, Patrick Queen is one of those guys for a guy who, if you talk about improved from what he was at the start of the year to what he
Yes.
ended the year doing, I mean,
Yes.
it's night and day. And obviously, we got to go back to Mr. Josh Bynes himself, Mr. Savior, and say thank you to him. But I think for Queen, he regained that confidence, played with that energy, that electricity, and that's great. But also, my second guy is Brandon Stevens. I think for Brandon Stevens, he is somebody who, again, was
Me
thrust into a
too.
role. He was thrust into a role, and really, he came out and did his thing.
Yeah. No, you're right. Absolutely. He kept, anytime you sit up in the press box, it's so doggone quiet for professional courtesy, and yet you just keep hearing Brandon Stevens' name, especially late in the year. I mean, that's when you're supposed to play your best football, right? So late in the year, he was like, his name kept getting called, and I was like, who is this guy? Kept showing up. I concur.
Yeah, it's great to now know that if the Ravens don't go the signing a safety route or bringing back Deshaun Elliott, they have somebody who showed that growth, showed that improvement, and I think could take a huge step forward again in the second season and kind of have that true breakout sophomore year. But Q, the disappointments on this defense, there were also a couple. Is you look at the pass defense, which was not good. Now the run offense was a different story, but who was your most disappointing player for Baltimore on defense?
I gosh, it's on the defensive front. Two guys. You know, let me just say it this way. So I'm gonna go from here's my top three. Marlon Humphreys. I know he got injured with the pectoral muscle trying to do the fruit punch thing, but he really, to be perfectly honest with you, was non-existent all year. I'm just gonna say it that way. I thought, Brandon Williams, outside of a play here or there, non-existent all year long. Calais Campbell, love me some Calais Campbell. But towards the end of the year, when you needed him, just wasn't able to go. Injury, no injury, whatever. Those are my three. I have the right to be disappointed in because I think so highly of them. I would say those three guys right there. Veteran guys that you need to rely upon. Just didn't get it done.
Right. And I think for me, I think Brandon Williams is up there for me as well. It seemed like he did get better in the second half of the season, but before he went out with that shoulder injury, he was getting bullied over by offensive linemen. It was like we never see that out of Brandon Williams, so that was a bit disappointing. I'm gonna say Jalen Ferguson just because he again just another year of him not really playing.
Yeah.
Where it was like he kind of like keeps reeling me back in with these preseason, like especially last preseason. He had a great preseason, and I initially had him off of my 53-man roster. I said, he just hasn't done enough. They can't afford to keep this linebacker, and then he had a phenomenal preseason. And I'm like, all right, hey, stick him on. He can do some stuff, and he just didn't play again when he was on the field. He didn't make a ton of impact plays, and for a guy who was drafted in the third round, broke Terrell Suggs' FBS sack record, you're kind of looking at that guy and saying, hey, he can do some stuff, but it just hasn't happened. So that to me is my disappointment for the season. But Q, let's round it out here with the comeback player of the year on defense. You mentioned Tyus Bowser and you mentioned Marcus Peters, but I wanted to get your opinion on one more guy in that role because we talked about Marlon Humphrey a little bit too. What do you feel about Derek Wolfe and his injury?
Well, it was kind of a mystery kind of in the beginning of the year. It was supposed to come back, and then it just kept lingering. And then finally, they just said, all right, we're shutting him down. And what is it, a hip, the labrum?
Right. Yeah.
So what do? You are coming off the edge, and you got a 300-pound man leaning back against you. So creating that resistance, that's a lot of pressure on that hip. Man, bro, I'm not sure we can put him in that comeback player of the year conversation.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I think also we talked about trenches, and it feels like the Ravens are heading towards somewhat of a big revamp on their defensive line. And
Right.
obviously, Wolf to me was the Ravens' best run defender in 2020. He was phenomenal for them, but they obviously want to generate more pressure from the interior. And Wolf only had 1 sack in 2020. And to your point about Calais Campbell had 31 and a half sacks in 3 years in Jacksonville. In 2 years in Baltimore, he's had 5.5. So you know, they want to do that. So where does Wolf fit into their plans? I think he does, but this isn't going to be somebody who's a 80-90% snap player, right? He's going to be in a fixed role, somebody who can come in and do some things, but at the same time, I'm not putting him in that award either. I'm going to say it's Marcus Peters. I mean, Bowser's somebody also.
Yeah.
We talked about him as well, but I think for me, Marcus Peters, he's going to have, I think, a really good bounce back season and kind of prove the people who are saying cut Marcus Peters a bit wrong there.
Yeah, no, I trust me. He was on the sideline. What game was that towards the end of the year? He was literally calling out route combinations and plays. Like, in other words, he was locked in and was like, I know exactly what's going on. I know how to articulate it. He's not sitting back thinking that, well, I just going to rehab and I'm going to tune out. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. He can. If there's a person that can make it happen, it's Marcus.
Oh yeah, and having him and Marlon Humphrey back at what hopefully will be full strength, alongside an improved defensive front, which I'm expecting them to invest in. I think the pass defense is going to be a lot better than what we saw, because if it gets any worse, there are going to be issues if it gets worse.
Thankfully, the schedule won't be as difficult because they didn't play as well. Now you're looking at, not playing the upper tier division leaders, and you're not playing the last place finishers in each division. So the AFC East playing the next to the two worst teams, so yay. You got time to go out there and show that you can take it to the next level and compete and win, and not feel like you're just barely hanging on with a really strength of schedule that's kind of too difficult for you.
Right, and I know, Q, we talked about how brutal that back half of the year was for Baltimore in 2021 with all those great teams they had to play. And now you mentioned it, that fourth place schedule. This is the first time in 4 years they're not playing the Chiefs in the regular season. So it's those kinds of things combined with they have the number 14 overall pick. They're getting their guys back from injury. It's all shaping up to, I think, be a very good 2022 for them, where even though the AFC is so talented, and we've talked about that before, they can make some noise.
Here's the one thing. When you look at last year, the Pittsburgh-Cleveland conundrum, I'm praying is not going to happen again. Like that weird, hey, Cleveland actually gets an advantage because they technically are in a bye. You don't have any film but the film you got on your own team. Then you got to play, Pittsburgh, and you're going on the road, and it just was really awkward. And I hope that, the schedule makers recognize what's what. Now, also, what kind of, sucks as far as the greater experience of it for Baltimore, maybe not me necessarily on my my TV programs, but you're not going to get the primetime games because you're not a primetime, draw any longer. You're kind of just a in the middle team. Now you're going to see, the Bengals being on prime time, and Joe Burrow is going to be the guy that everybody's talking about. Of course, the paper champions of the offseason, the Cleveland Browns, they sure are going to be like, look at us, and try to play the disrespect card, but whatever. We'll crown you guys the offseason champions per usual. But I think this is kind of a new dynamic for what we're seeing in Baltimore. You kind of got a little spoiled with some primetime games. You're not going to have it come next year. I'm going to look down the list. 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Thursday night.
All right. Do you remember that? How in the first 5 weeks the Ravens had 1 o'clock game? They had 3 primetime games. They had a 4:25, and then the 1 o'clock. It was unbelievable how, and that's what happens, right? The team goes 14-2 in 2019. They end the 2020 season strong. They win the playoff game. They have Lamar Jackson. It's a team that people want to see play. But now you mentioned it with, Joe Burrow is probably going to get the maximum 5 that you can get of the primetime games. Baltimore, they might get it again, but it wouldn't be shocking to me to see maybe 3 primetime games for them where they play on Thursday night, Monday night. Who knows?
I don't think Monday night. I think just the Thursday night. To be honest with you, I mean you know the TV execs, they don't play. They're trying to squeeze out everything. And I'm looking at a Joe Burrow. I'm looking at who Justin Herbert. Who over in the AFC East that we can. Is it the Colts? Are they, somebody that we can, put on a primetime stage? Taylor, he blew it up and did really well. Obviously, they're not going to keep Wentz, but they're going to look at the Lamar Jackson factor, no question about it. But the big picture is they're trying to get those name marquee matchups because of your performance from the previous year and making the playoffs.
Yeah, well, so it's good if that is the way it goes. It is kind of okay. One, because of what you talked about, Q. Our schedules are a little bit more set in stone, and we understand. No, we don't have to do this at this time and this at that time.
Yes.
But also, the Ravens love playing in the shadows a little bit, just having those 1 o'clock games. They love the lights too. I'm not saying they don't. They've had very good performances under the primetime lights. Look at Indianapolis last season. But I think that the Ravens, they love to move in silence, as Joe Burrow gracefully said, although Lamar Jackson's posting his workout videos, which he's looked good and they look great, and I want him to keep doing it. But for me, Q, I'm excited about where this team can go, and I think they have a lot of potential. But that's all I have for you here today. Thank you so much again for hopping on with me here, and we're getting close. We're getting close to free agency. We're getting close to the draft. I feel like it'll be here before we know it.
Well, all I know is the offseason championship is upon us, and it's going to be interesting to see what Cleveland does to help themselves secure the title, because it matters not.
As long as the Ravens stick to their plan, it seems like they have one. I think they'll be just fine. But Q, again, thank you. That's all we have for you. Here's a day on Locked On Ravens. Take a 2-day break, and when we get back on Monday, we'll dive into our first mock draft Monday of 2022 draft season. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you on Monday.